I will be here taking notes and fielding questions throughout. If the question, and then our panelists will also take time to answer questions. So that's why I'm here, and welcome. And I'm going to pass over to Katherine right now. You're on mute, Katherine. Classic way to start.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I had to mute myself because with all that good music playing, you know, I wanted to sing along with it as well. So thank you for joining our webinar, The Perfect Storm, a Forest, Climate, and Justice webinar. And thank you so very much to Dogwood Alliance for sponsoring this webinar for us. My name is Katherine Egland, and I'm a member of the NAACP National Board of Directors. I was elected first in 1998. And I have served as the chair of the board's Environmental and Climate Justice Committee since the program was established in 2010. I'm also the co-founder of the Education, Economics, Environmental, Climate, and Health organization. That acronym is ECHO, which is a grassroots coalition that addresses the unique environmental and climate challenges confronting disproportionately vulnerable residents within the Gulf of Mexico region, where I live. Which is, I live about a 5-minute walk from the Gulf of Mexico. We've lost count of the number of times that we've had to prepare for storms, and all through the night we were getting warning notices from NOAA about the approaching storm. So it gets a little frightening when you see a storm go from a Category 3 to a Category 4 within less than half an hour. And my home was destroyed by Hurricane Katrina, living this close to the Gulf of Mexico. And I always tell people we were able to rebuild our home, but unfortunately we lost 2 of our dearest friends to drowning when Katrina's water came rushing rapidly into their homes. Climbing into their attics was not enough to save them. Unfortunately, they relied on the fact that their home had withstood Hurricane Camille in 1969, and they thought that that was going to be the worst hurricane in history. And so we see a lot has happened since that time. As my position as chair of the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Committee, I provide the governance and oversight of our NAACP policy positions, toolkits, and all of our critically acclaimed research and reports, and have worked towards advancing the NAACP strategic objectives from a moral, human rights, social justice, and equity perspective through lots of different avenues. This environmental and climate policy background extends from the Gulf South, where I live, to the global South and beyond. I've represented the NAACP and ECHO at United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Events, Conference of Parties in Warsaw, Poland, Lima, Peru, Paris, France, during the signing or during the negotiations of the Paris Climate Agreement, in Marrakesh, Morocco, Bonn, Germany, Katowice, Poland, and last year was the liaison and lead for the U.S. delegation for the United States Climate Action Network at COP25 in Madrid, Spain. Also as TAN liaison, I attended along with Reverend Leo a strategic planning session in San Jose, Costa Rica, also the SBI conference in Bonn, Germany, and have also attended CAN International Strategy sessions in Bangkok, Poland, and also was a speaker in Malaysia, believe it or not, on forests, and that was during the year when I found out, and it literally cut me off at the knees to know that I had been in Malaysia, Penang, Malaysia, championing forests, them keeping their forests because they wanted to run this huge road which was just going to destroy all of their forests for a 6-lane highway. And so I was literally cut off at the knees to learn that here in my state, There was a proposed at that time, what would be the world's largest biomass manufacturing plant that was being proposed 65 miles from my hometown in Lucedale, Mississippi. Since that time, that project has been permitted, and certainly we have geared up since then to try to have a campaign that will save our forest. Because what we are doing is destroying U.S. forests for the building of wood pellets. And we have a country here, and it's very ironic. We have a country that has denied climate change, says it does not exist, has denied the science of climate change, but has classified biomass as a renewable source of energy to supply to countries to reduce their emissions in accordance with the Paris Climate Agreement, of which we've withdrawn. So what we have here is a situation where we have a country that is supplying a climate solution, you know, as an answer to a problem that we say does not exist. So I don't want that irony to be lost on any of us. So this morning we do have a very robust discussion. We have some very distinguished speakers that I would like to introduce this morning. And then we will have, please, as Adam mentioned at the beginning, go ahead and any questions that you have to come up, go ahead and place them in the Q&A box, and we will try and get to as many as we can. Our first speaker this morning is Danna Smith. Danna founded Dogwood Alliance in 1996 to fight against the impacts of industrial logging on the environment, economy, and communities of the South. Dogwood Alliance has transformed the practices of some of the largest consumers of paper in the world, as well as 4 of the top 5 paper producers, increasing protection for over 90 million acres of southern U.S. forests. She is the leading voice connecting the dot between climate, forest destruction, and environmental justice, and pushing for forest protection in the U.S. at the scale necessary to meet the sustainability challenges of the 21st century. So it is my pleasure to present to you Danna Smith.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I love hearing your story. It's so inspiring and heartfelt. We have got to get real about what's going on with U.S. forests, y'all. I grew up in the world's largest wood producing region. And just for the record, I didn't grow up in Brazil or Indonesian rainforest. I grew up in the coastal plain of the southeastern U.S. in coastal South Carolina. I grew up smelling the pollution from the paper mill every time we crossed the Savannah River Bridge. I remember going home from Savannah as a child and thinking what a relief it was to be able to breathe fresh air. I remember feeling gratitude for not having to live in Savannah next to that monster. I saw large swaths of once incredibly diverse native forests where I used to hunt and hike with my dad, laid barren and replaced with rows upon rows of loblolly pine seedlings that some people called a forest, but I knew was not. I know all too well the way in which the forest industry and large landowners dominate local politics in the name of jobs and the economy and sustainable forestry, while visibly seeing rural communities at the epicenter of the world's largest wood producing region in constant decline, struggling to make ends meet. I've seen firsthand the wealth disparity and how it's clearly drawn along racial lines. I've seen how that wealth disparity is clearly drawn along lines of who owns the land and who does not own the land. And I've seen the way in which those who don't own the land, their concerns, ideas, and voices are consistently discounted, ignored, tossed aside, and left out of the conversation. I've also seen the way in which science is likewise consistently ignored. If it happens to illuminate some negative impact of the forest industry, it is discounted, criticized, tossed aside, and ignored. In 25 years of doing forest protection work in the world's largest wood producing region, my home, I have seen all of these things firsthand. So it's awesome to have so many of you here on the webinar today from across the country. It's also really exciting and hopeful to see forests are becoming increasingly a part of proposals at a policy level that are being put forward on climate change and green jobs and economic recovery. I think that's a hopeful sign that finally, forests are seen as a vital solution to the climate crisis, and that people are starting to think about how forests relate to some of the other crises we face, like the just devastating, deep-rooted health and economic disparities that exist in our society, that underlying all of that is institutional racism at every level that we're now having to confront across our country. At the same time that there is this hope, there is this really, really dangerous thing happening right now when it comes to forests and policy. There is a lot of talk, you'll even hear it from the forest industry, about the benefits of forests, about how they pull carbon out of the atmosphere, protect our communities against flooding and other extreme weather events, about how they provide clean water and wildlife habitat, a place to recreate. But there's an elephant in the room that too many people working in the space of forest don't want to confront. And that is the impacts that the forest industry is having on climate and low-income communities of color in this country. The US is the world's largest producer and consumer of wood products. The scale of logging in the southeastern US alone is 4 times that of South American rainforest. This is having devastating impacts on climate change. It's actually contributing to the climate problem in ways that are currently being unrecognized. And Bill's going to talk more about that in his presentation. It's also having devastating impacts on communities. And we're going to hear from Leo about some more about that. But there is an utter failure to acknowledge these impacts in our country. And that reflects, at this point in time, a willingness to continue to put the interests of corporations and large landowners ahead of the health and well-being of certain communities and the planet. The most egregious example right now that we have of this is how wood is rapidly being put forward as a green, climate-friendly alternative to coal and gas. The US South has become the world's largest exporter of wood pellets. Concerns that communities have been raising about the pollution and the destruction have been falling on deaf ears. The scientific warnings that this is not a climate solution and is taking us backwards are also seem to be falling on deaf ears. Meanwhile, companies like Enviva, the world's largest wood pellet manufacturer, are steamrolling mill after mill through the permitting process against the will of people who suffer the most direct impacts. But this problem is also found in policies that are promoting wood as a natural climate alternative building material to steel and concrete, or an alternative to plastics. It's also found in policies that are promoting logging as a solution to the wildfire issue out west, where the science is documenting that industrial logging has actually created the conditions that are making the fires worse. Any forest-related policy on climate and green jobs that fails to acknowledge or address the climate and community impacts of the forest industry is perpetuating the climate crisis and is complicit in the direct harm that is being done to low-income and communities of color. This is why we are holding this webinar. We want more people to understand how to discern between solutions that are truly green versus solutions that are greenwashing. We need people to be able to tell the difference between forest, climate, and jobs policies that truly understand that Black lives really do matter, versus those that simply perpetuate the current systems of power, wealth, and influence. We have to get forest policy right, or we might as well throw in the towel when it comes to climate justice. But we can do this. This is not rocket science. We don't have to come up with some new technology. We know that forests have the power to help solve the climate crisis and to help protect our communities. We know that forests play a vital role in sustaining the economies of our local communities. This requires us, however, to confront and acknowledge the emerging science that is clear about the impacts that this industry is having on climate change and communities, and for us to confront the injustices to people and to our natural world. I'm going to turn it back to you, Kathy, so we can hear from Reverend Leo.
Thank you, Danna. That was just so very well stated and so very much needed as well. Our next speaker, Reverend Leo Woodberry, has been an environmental justice champion since the early 90s. He's helped bring the KKK to justice in South Carolina. And he did that. That's something that we both have in common, growing up in a segregated South and having to be confronted with groups like the Ku Klux Klan. And we don't see a lot of difference today as it relates to disparities, as it relates to Black, brown, and indigenous population. Reverend Leo has organized low-income and Black communities around water quality issues, including halting the construction of the PD coal plant, and has served on the steering committee of the People's Climate Movement. His nonprofit, New Alpha Community Development Corporation, has been influential in creating the South Carolina State Energy Plan. Reverend Leo.
Thank you so much, Kathy, and thank you, Danna, as well for that really, really great information. You know, one of the things that I love about this webinar is the title, The Perfect Storm, Climate, Forest, Climate, and Justice. Because when we bring those three things together, we create a storm, a positive storm, a storm where the winds of change will sweep away outmoded ideas and approaches to how we generate energy, and also bring about a refreshing rain which can nourish the soil in which new ideas, new creativity, and new ways of building engines of economic development can come about in rural communities. And see, rural communities are really important. A lot of people forget the fact that we would not be where we are in terms of the climate crisis if we cared about communities, particularly low-income communities and people of color communities, where we find the majority of polluting facilities sited. 78% of African Americans live within 30 miles of a polluting facility or an interstate highway. And so why should we be surprised when we see that the logging industry, forestry industry, the biomass wood pellet industry has chosen these very same communities as targets for exploitation and even threatening their health. So as we travel around the South, whether we're in Virginia or Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, we find in rural communities that people say that the flooding is worse once the logging takes place, once the clear cuts are established. And some of these communities have been hammered over and over again. So we look at communities like Nichols, South Carolina, rural community, Britain's Neck, South Carolina, where people have had to evacuate 3 times in the last 5 years. And not only evacuate, but when you look at these communities that are more susceptible to devastating flooding because of the logging, we find that in Nichols, South Carolina, half the town is gone. People could no longer afford to keep repairing their homes. They took state buyouts, and half of the town is gone. I remember talking with Reverend Bobby Rogers and him saying, half of my church is gone. All the young people, the young adults with children who can afford to move are gone, and only those who are impoverished, making as little as $600 a month on their SSI checks, are staying. We look down at Britain's neck, South Carolina, where the people have been told they have to elevate their homes as much as 6 and 8 feet, or they won't be eligible for flood insurance or FEMA. And not only do we have these problems where large-scale logging is taking place near our wetlands and near our forests, but we also see the health impacts that happen. Let's remember that our wetlands and our forests filter our water. They provide cooling in the heat of the summer, but it impacts our health in other ways as well. When you look at companies like Enviva, the world's largest manufacturer of wood pellets, we can go to Greenwood, South Carolina, where people are complaining about the fact that when they go to the car to get their car washed, that the people washing their cars are amazed at how much sawdust is on their cars. Or they talk about at a public hearing with the Department of Health and Environmental Control, how they have to constantly clean out their pools, how particulate matter from log trucks and the pollutants that are released from Enviva smokestacks and the diesel fumes from the trucks that run in and out every day is impacting their health. And not only impacting their health, but we need to call for a moratorium, particularly during this pandemic, on any polluting facility, especially those that impact our forests, in a time of a pandemic where poor people and African Americans are more susceptible to contracting COVID and getting sick or dying. In South Carolina, African Americans make up approximately 27% of the population, but African Americans are 47% of the people who have died in the state of South Carolina. So what we need are new solutions, true solutions. The science is in. We leave our forests standing, and that is the greatest way for us to address the issue of the climate crisis and pull carbon from the air. Maintain our forests, don't cut them down. In rural communities, that's pretty much the only asset that is left. But instead, we can leave our forests standing, and we can instead create engines of economic opportunity by building retaining ponds to minimize flooding, by doing outdoor recreation, which in North Carolina and several other states actually generates more revenue than the wood product industry does. And so if we want to really change things, if we're tired of being buffeted by the same old winds of dirty extractive energy, then we have to look at our forests as part of the solution. And we have to look at how we address the issue of climate, not by removing our greatest defense for flooding, but instead by letting forests stand. And finally, taking impoverished communities with a legacy of pollution and injustice and making them engines that create prosperity for all. So thank you so much for this opportunity. But let us keep in mind, forest, climate, justice, the perfect storm for making the necessary changes in our world.
Thank you, Reverend Leo. He is always so very, very inspiring. And unfortunately, the stats that you gave from South Carolina as it relates to COVID-19 disparities, I think would be the case in almost every country, state in this nation. We've seen these disparities, and most of them are related to pre-existing conditions that are brought about from environmental exposures. So Forest, you know, we keep talking about prevention is the best medicine. Forest is a great preventative medicine. Our next speaker, Dr. Bill Moomaw, began working on climate change in 1988 as the first director of the climate program at the Rural Resources Institute. He has been a lead author of 5 intergovernmental panel on climate change IPCC reports, one of which was jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. He is currently working on natural solutions to climate change with a focus on increasing carbon dioxide removal and sequestration by forests, wetlands, and soil. If you ever want to know anything, any type of information, my 2 go-to sources on climate are the World Resources Institute and IPCC. So it has really been a privilege and an honor, and I hope to continue communicating with Dr. Moomaw, because those are the 2 go-to information or places where you can get information. And so knowing that Dr. Bill has been a part of both of these programs certainly gives him a lot of expertise to present to us. Thank you, Dr. Moomaw.
Thank you very much, Katherine. Let me just get I'm going to do a little presentation here. Let's see, slideshow, play from the start. Okay. You've heard some really important information from Danna about what's happening with forests, and particularly in the Southeast US, and from Reverend Leo about the social justice dimensions. And I'm really supportive of everything they said. And so let me just talk now about just the climate issue. For those who have any doubts about where the science is, last November, actually it happened to be published one day after President Trump announced we were going to be pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement. 4 colleagues and I published this paper. And at the time we published it, it's called The World Scientist Warning of a Climate Emergency. And we debated a long time. You hear a lot of talk about catastrophe and so forth, but emergency is what it is. An emergency means that that something terrible is happening and we need to respond to it. Whereas I think a catastrophe says it's kind of here and over. There's nothing we can do. So this has actually a hopeful dimension to it as well. There are things we can do to respond to a climate emergency. And we can reduce emissions from fossil fuels and other sources. And we can remove heat-trapping atmospheric carbon dioxide by increasing the removal of its removal by allowing existing trees to continue growing. And I'm going to frame the rest of this pretty much in those terms. Now you'll hear people say that, well, forests can't do it all. Well, nothing can do it all. I mean, if we did everything we can with solar panels, that wouldn't do it all either. But it's interesting, it's underappreciated that growing more forests can do more, is doing more right now, and can do more in the future than any single action we can take. So we know that this is urgent, and it's an emergency, and it's urgent that we react to it. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, at the request of governments, said that they would have to, they said, well, you know, governments have agreed we should keep the temperature from rising more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. And the question is, how do we do that? And so they said, well, to do it, we have to reduce the heat trapping gases by 45% from 2005 by 2030. That is, the level it was in 2005, we have to be 45% below it. That means almost half. We have to cut in half what we were emitting just 15 years ago. By the way, half of all the carbon dioxide ever emitted, we have emitted since the early 1990s of the whole world. So we've got our work cut out for it. And we must not emit more than nature can remove by 2050 to halt future increases. Plants with carbon dioxide and water and the energy of the sun convert the carbon in the carbon dioxide into carbon in the wood and trees. And approximately half of the weight of dry wood is carbon. And what this will do is it will still increase global temperatures by about 1/3 more than they already are. We are at 2 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're supposed to keep it below 2.7. So our goal is to make things worse rather than better. So we need to do better than that, and we need action now. It's urgent. So here are just some facts about forest and climate. So fossil fuel combustion annually emits about 9.5 billion tons of carbon. That's almost incomprehensible, but that's a number. Just think 9.5. And 2/3 of that is carbon dioxide. Other gases also trap heat. Deforestation annually adds another 1.5 billion tons to the atmosphere. And that's just from the cutting down of trees. And we'll take a look at that again in a moment. But globally, forests annually remove from the atmosphere 1/3, 33% of the amount of emitted carbon from fossil fuel combustion. So imagine how much worse things would be if our forests had not been growing as they are. We would be in much worse shape because the heat trapping from those gases would be much greater. US forests annually remove only 11.6% of our carbon emissions, which is low compared to this 33% for the world as a whole. And the reason for that, we know because there have been studies that show that just in 2018, a group in Germany led by Professor Erb found that altering forest management to let more trees grow would allow global forests to accumulate twice as much carbon as they are now doing. In other words, we have managed our forests. You can see in this photo, there are a lot of little skinny trees in there, and there's only one big one. And in another study that was also done in 2018 by Lutz and his colleagues, this is a direct quotation from the paper. The largest 1% of trees in mature and older forests comprised 50% of forest biomass worldwide. What that means is out of every 100 trees, so just count the stems there, come up with 100 of them, and one of them, the biggest one, holds half the carbon. That means very clearly we need more big trees because that's where the carbon is stored. And we need more forests with more big trees in order to address the climate change at scale. And a paper just came out in September that finds that the potential for growing forests to accumulate carbon has been underestimated by about 1/3, 32%. So there's more to letting forests grow than we have thought in the past. Now we hear a lot of discussion about planting trees, and planting trees is good. There's no question about it. But letting them grow is better, and let me show you why. Last year in June, 2 colleagues and I published a paper about what it would mean to let more trees grow. And we realized that people talk about planting trees a lot, reforestation after we've cut down trees, afforestation when we plant them somewhere they haven't been growing. But there was no word for letting trees grow. So we searched around and we came up with the term proforestation, which means that we're going to let some of the trees grow. And so here's basically the definition of that. Growing forests to reach their potential for carbon accumulation in wood and soils in the absence of human interference. And one of the things about the Cook patent paper that I mentioned before is it demonstrates that in fact, letting forests grow in the absence of human interference does a better job than managed forests in terms of accumulating carbon. And so many people argue that, well, young trees are very efficient, they're growing really fast and so on, and yet they overlook a simple point, that let's say, even if that were true, and it isn't always true. They grow large and fast in a percentage basis, but they don't store much carbon. A little skinny tree, like this one right here, doesn't store much carbon compared to this one right here. And so cutting older trees and planting younger, fast-growing trees will not surpass the carbon accumulation by continuing to grow larger trees. This little tree has to grow to be as big as this tree to store as much carbon as that tree already has. So why would you cut that big one down to plant a little tree to grow faster? So I want to correct two false assumptions. Danna has mentioned both of them. Reverend Leo mentioned the bioenergy one. And the two statements that are made often by the forestry industry and by a lot of political figures is that burning wood for electricity, bioenergy, is carbon neutral, but it's not carbon neutral, and it's not even climate neutral, as I'll demonstrate in a moment. And burning wood products also produces these major health risks, as Reverend Leo pointed out. And the second false assumption is that carbon stored in wood products is a way to store carbon. That is, when you have a wood product that has wood and it has carbon in it, and that's stored. That's true. But I'll demonstrate in a moment that there's more carbon emitted in making that product than is stored in the product. And in a paper that was published last year by Mark Harmon, who's a very famous forestry expert out in Oregon, he estimates that the wood product benefits are often overestimated by factors of between 2 and 100 times. Back in 2010, a study was done by Nunnery and Keaton for all kinds of different harvesting. Each one of these bars represents everything on the left, from clear cutting to the next to the last one on the right is an individual tree selection process. The light gray color is the amount that's stored in wood products. So from a clear cut there on the left, you can see roughly half of the carbon that was in the original forest, that's the height of the bar, is stored in that product. And then there's some left in the forest, because when they clear cut, there's still a little bit left, so usually, not always. But there's a lot of dead wood. That's what the big bar at the bottom is, because there aren't many things left. And so that comes out to about 70 million grams of carbon per hectare. Well, just say 70. On the very far right, a forest with no management is storing not 70, but maybe 160 or 170. And almost all of it is in living trees. That's the dark bar at the bottom. And there's none stored in products. And that's what the forest looked like before it was cut. And that's what it's looking like at a point in time when it hasn't been cut. So where's the carbon from a harvested forest? What happens to it? And this graphic, this is research that was done by the US Forest Service, by the way, finds that in the US, in the particular year that they chose to look at, which is sometime in the mid-20 teens, that US forest harvesting yielded 162 million tons of carbon per year in that year. And I looked up on the US inventory of emissions, and that's greater than all of the emissions from all the buildings in the United States, which is 149 million tons of carbon. And so when you look at all the emissions that come from forests, insect damage, fire, wind, drought, conversion, that's all adds up to 15%. And the emissions that come from the harvesting, because as you saw, at most half of the carbon that's there goes into the atmosphere, either by rotting left behind to rot and decay, or it goes to a mill and is burned for heat or electricity. Some colleagues and I out in the Pacific Northwest decided to take a look at a place that has really good data, which is the state of Oregon. We know exactly when the forestry industry began. It was in 1900, and there were data that ran through 2015 that we could look at. And we said, where is the carbon that was originally in that forest today? or at least in 2015. And it turns out that indeed, some of it is stored. 19%, that reddish wedge, is in long-lived wood products. Now, this is over 115 years now. And 16% is in landfills, where it is decaying and slowly emitting carbon dioxide and methane. But 65%, nearly 2/3 of that carbon, is in the atmosphere. And we have to remember there's this huge legacy of carbon dioxide from past logging in our atmosphere that we're going to have to remove. And let me just say something about this burning wood for electricity. This happens to be up in my area, up here in New England. It looks clean because it's not operating. The reason it's not operating is because it only works if it's subsidized, and some of the governments up here have pulled the subsidies, and therefore they're not working. A colleague of mine at MIT, John Sturman, has done a lot of work on the emissions from burning wood. And this is just a graph showing up the left side is, well, the zero line is not burning anything. So that would be the amount of carbon emitted if we use solar energy. And the red line going up is the immediate release of carbon dioxide, which is, by the way, from burning wood is greater than burning coal. And then you can see as trees grow back, the red line goes down, but it takes 98 years before you're back to where you were before when you started 98 years before. And the other point that he and I and others have made is that during all that time, you can see there's more carbon dioxide, the space between the black line and the red line, the black arrow and the red line. And that means that a glacier melts somewhere. And when trees grow back, the glacier doesn't refreeze. That's what we mean by not climate neutral. Or sea level has risen. The sea level doesn't go back down. Any of the changes that take place are irreversible. And finally, let me just say something about the health effects. A few years ago, these 8 organizations, the American Lung Association, Allergy and Asthma Network, American Academy of Pediatrics, the National Environmental Health Association, Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America, American Public Health Association, National Association of County and City Health Officials, wrote a letter to Congress where they said, burning biomass creates air pollution that causes a sweeping array of health harms, from asthma attacks to cancer to heart attacks, resulting in emergency room visits, hospitalizations, and premature deaths. As Reverend Leo pointed out, with COVID, this is not what you want, is to have these small particulates aggravating the COVID infection. And it's very clear that one of the reasons that people who are living close to these facilities are having higher death rates, and often that's people of color living in poor communities. This is not something that's just made up. This is very real. Millions of infants and children, older adults, individuals with respiratory or cardiovascular disease or diabetes, and individuals with lower incomes face a higher risk of suffering serious health effects from these pollutants. So this is a statement that was made before COVID. I am sure that they are in the process of writing another statement now in the face of COVID. So we need to push back against these false narratives, and we need to recognize that while no single solution to climate change exists, that the biggest solution we have is the one of protecting our forest. It will do the most, it will do it in the shortest time, and at the least cost. So let's go out and do it. Thank you. Here's just one last thing I wanted to say. What's the greatest good for the greatest number? That's what Gifford Pinchot said when he's the sort of the godfather of the forestry industry in forest, supposedly forest conservation in America. So do we want a forest to be forest reserves for carbon and ecosystem services like preventing flooding, biological diversity? Here are 2 prominent carbon scientists standing in a forest next to a very large white pine tree up here in the Northeast. And in the other picture, we have this is what's happening in our area. truckload after truckload of these just perfect size logs that are just the right size to become as big as the ones on the left in the coming years are being taken out. So we need to make a choice. So let's let more trees grow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. And now we're going to get to our questions, and we're going to have to move very, very quickly so that we can get through each one of the questions and then try and get to some questions in our Q&A. So if we could keep our responses, panelists, to 1 minute or less, that would be great. First question, from your perspective, what is the relationship between forest climate change and community justice?
Well, the link is pretty clear. I've tried to explain why forests are so important for climate. They're already doing this huge job for us, and they could be doing twice as much. What a difference that would make. And in terms of justice, it's just very clear that the ways that we are using our forests are harming the poor of all races, and in particular, people of color who happen to live in these areas where they come with these plants, whether it's the making of the pellets or the burning of the wood.
Okay.
It's important to note also that what we're hearing from the climate scientists and what we're hearing from the frontline communities is basically the same thing.
That's right.
We need to protect more forests.
Thanks, Reverend Leo.
Oh, no, I was nodding my head in agreement that.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, next question. Generally speaking, why do we think that climate action here in the U.S. gets it wrong on U.S. forests? Who'd like to take a stab at that?
I guess the easy answer to that is what Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, that we have to move away from putting profits over people. And that's it in a nutshell, that not only the people profit from this, not care about the climate, not care about the forest, but they also don't care about the people who are sick. And in some cases, when we have a weather or climate related disaster, they sometimes even lose their lives. So simply profit over people.
Okay, thank you.
Also,
I would say too, go ahead, Bill.
Well, just very quickly, I mean, when Europeans came here, the forest looked like it was infinite. And we've never gotten over that attitude. We've done the same with the fish in the ocean. Oh, it's just infinite. So we can just keep harvesting this forever. And that's just not true. We are degrading it and making it less productive, when with very simple things that we can do, we could be making it more productive for everybody.
Danna?
I was going to say, I think there are 5 reasons. One is that people are ignoring the impacts of the forest industry on communities of color. They're either not hearing the stories or they're not listening to what is going on down here. I think the second is that they're ignoring the science. The science has been rapidly evolving in this space. And as we've heard from Bill, we now know what we need to do, but too many are denying this new science that's documenting the devastating impacts that logging is having. I think the third is that too many people have fallen for forest industry greenwashing and gaslighting at a time when we need to be doing whatever it takes to turn the tide on climate change. Well-resourced industry, lobbyists, allies, and spin masters are creating confusion and deflecting responsibility in order to protect the status quo of which they are benefiting from financially in a very profound way. The fourth thing I think is that climate leaders too often are focused on solutions that work for Wall Street to the exclusion of climate solutions that actually work for rural communities. And the fifth is that, people are just not right now challenging the forest industry, standing up to the forest industry and holding the forest industry accountable for its impacts.
Okay, thank you. Our next lightning round question. What are some of the best solutions to these issues?
The best solutions should be those that are led by communities. They know the problems and they know the solutions. So whether we're talking about increasing the buffer zone between our wetlands and our communities by planting shrubbery, grasses, arrow cane, that sort of stuff, or planting more trees, which might be fruit or nut orchards, or building retaining ponds to mitigate the flooding and also provide fish, yet another business that can flourish with ecotourism, etc. All of these things are options, but they should be led by the community because the community knows the problem and they know the best solutions.
I'd just like to add, we also need more examples. I mean, here we have the three of us working together. It is the science, it is the ethical values question, and it's just the facts on the ground. And the people who have been observing those for, what did you say, Danna, 24 years? It's getting alliances formed among people who know and people who care.
I would say there's sort of four categories. And the first one, you know, Leo is the best person to talk about. We've got to start listening to these communities. They have to be centered in terms of solutions. They've for too long been ignored as part of the development of policies around forests in this country. And Leo and I have been fortunate enough to be able to do a series of listening sessions with folks on the front lines of industrial logging from across the South this summer to really hear their thoughts about solutions. And one of the themes that came across really loud and clear, there's a couple, but one is, you know, they want the harm to stop. They want to stop this expansion of this dirty industry in their communities. We can't even get to solutions when our forests and our communities are under constant assault. So that has to be a part of any climate solution, has got to be to stop the expansion of this dirty forest products industry across the South. We also, secondly, need to, and we heard this from our communities as well that we listened to, as Leo said, scale up the protection of forests along the rivers. People also want places to recreate. They want to have access to nature. And a lot of these places, the land is privately owned and they don't have the same kind of access to public lands and to nature and outdoor recreation. Industry needs to be held accountable for its carbon impacts, just like we are holding calling for the fossil fuel emission industry to reduce its emissions. We need to be calling and holding accountable the forest industry for reducing its emissions coming from forests as well. And right now the forest industry is getting a complete free pass on this in climate policy. The third thing, we need to shift the regulatory framework of tax incentives and regulatory frameworks to really, instead of promoting and facilitating industrial logging, to promoting and encouraging leaving trees in the ground. And finally, we need to shift our economic development model thinking away from this global industrial model of extraction to really focus on rural community, diverse entrepreneurial businesses and economic development to things like, tied to things like outdoor recreation, which create way more jobs than the forest industry does, and is consistent with you know, a climate agenda that would leave a lot more trees in the ground.
Okay, next question. And we will certainly hear questions posed such as this. If we continue to let forests stand and get off fossil fuels, what do we do for housing and furniture?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I built a house several years ago, and I did use some lumber to frame the house, but much of the other materials were not made from wood. They are composite materials of various kinds that are more durable than wood, actually. In fact, one of the problems I had is I insisted that the trim on the house be wood. Well, that was, let's see, we're in our 14th year here. Within 10 years, I've had to replace all of the wood trim on the house. So for outside use, wood is not so good, particularly when it's grown in these rapidly growing tree plantations. The grain is too wide and it's too susceptible to fungus getting into it and rotting it. So there are a lot of other materials. You know, we could have a smaller forest product industry that would meet all of our needs, but not all of our created needs, or all of our all of the needs that the industry tries to create. And so I think and having longer, for those having longer rotation times between harvests, that could be sustainable, but it's got to be a smaller industry than it is today.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to leave right now because I'm supposed to be talking to a Senate staffer about what to do, exactly what we're talking about right now.
Exactly, and that's very important. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate
Okay, thank you.
I think
So-
just to follow up on what Bill was saying, Kathy, you know, look, I think sometimes people think when we communicate that we need to protect forests, that people immediately jump to the fact that that means we can't use any more wood products. You know, and this is something that I think is a real way that the forest industry kind of, you know, greenwashes, is talking about how we need wood products. And while certainly we may need some wood products, as people have pointed out, maybe for building houses and things like that, society wouldn't collapse if we stopped producing the vast majority of the wood products that are currently being produced and discarded as trash. In fact, wood products make up the lion's share of our landfills. We don't need more trash, more stuff, or bigger houses, but what we do need is a safe, healthy, livable planet.
And we have produced housing in the past, you know, using all kinds of natural items, using stone, making bricks, you know. So there's this addiction to wood products is much akin to our addiction to fossil fuels. And we just have to live simpler. And a large part of the wood product industry, we can get other resources. There's other alternatives. So, for example, for the early part of the U.S. history on up until the 30s and 40s, people didn't get paper just from trees, but also from hemp and other natural products that come from the earth. And so we have plenty of alternatives, but we have to come out of our comfort zone. And if we don't choose to come out of our comfort zone, then the climate is going to bring us out of it on its own.
Okay, thank you so much, Reverend Leo. Now, let me ask the panelists, can you explain more about how forests help the economy of our local communities?
Sure, absolutely. So a few years back, we did the study of looking at the value of standing wetland forests along the rivers for things like flood control, carbon sequestration, water purification, wildlife habitat. And we looked at we tried to quantify the value of that. You can't really quantify the value of nature. That's one of the problems that we're facing right now, is trying to, you know, put a dollar on nature. But just for the sake of trying to figure out how the comparison might be between the value of those ecological services versus the value from logging. And what we found was that standing forests are 15 times more valuable for all to communities for all of these other ecosystem services than they are for wood products. Put another way is that every time we're logging the forest for wood products and disrupting those ecosystem services, society incurs a cost associated with that. On the other hand, we look at the jobs that could be created from outdoor recreation. For example, if we left trees standing. And we note that communities where outdoor recreation is a cornerstone of the economy, where the forests are protected and there's access to the community to nature, tend to be economically better off in rural areas than those who are dominated by industrial logging.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Danna. So our next question, can you say a bit more about the difference between the pine plantations and hardwood forests in terms of protection from hurricanes? And how is Dogwood Alliance or other groups working in collaboration with groups working on other EJ issues, specifically biogas in North Carolina? Those are several questions in one.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Well, when we talk about pine plantation, as Bill Moomaw pointed out, the trees are not as sturdy. They're not as old. They don't remove as much carbon. And the other thing that happens with pine plantations is that you have disrupted the ecosystem. So when you look at a natural forest, you see all different types of trees of different sizes. You see shrubbery, you see vines, you see grasses. When you look at a pine plantation, you don't see very much of that. And that has a huge impact on the ecosystem that includes us. So if there's no habitat for certain types of birds or insects or honeybees, all of that impacts nature's ability to pollinate the food that we have and do other things. And so that's the difference between a true forest and a pine plantation.
That's right. And in terms of how we are working with other EJ issues, Dogwood is very well integrated and connected with a coalition of organizations throughout the state of North Carolina working on environmental justice issues. We focus our work mostly on the biomass issue and the wood pellets and the forest piece, but we are part of a larger coalition that is advancing an agenda that is consistently raising the same issues of the impacts of EJ communities, whether it's biogas or CAFOs or the pipeline issues. And we are consistent in being a part of that broader coalition.
Thank you, Danna. So there are several questions about biomass and what can be done in both the US and Europe to stop the industry and protect forests. What can people do to make a difference on both a local and global level? And is there one more important than the other? And I'm just going to pose this, this question to me is a bit, on one hand, talking about supply and demand. And so I see a couple of questions in our Q&A that kind of reference those concerns. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, the biomass wood pellet industry has no market in the United States. Its markets are in Europe and in Asia. And so what we have are companies like Enviva taking out our very valuable assets and shipping them overseas to be burned. And I was at one hearing that the Department of Environmental Quality had in North Carolina, and there was a fellow who testified from Europe, and he said, if biomass wood pellets are so good and so wonderful, how come we're cutting down the trees in the United States of America and leaving our forests standing? Also, when we look at the biomass wood pellet industry, it cannot sustain itself without subsidies. And so if we work overseas to stop the subsidies that are going on in Europe, that is sustaining and maintaining this industry. And then on a local level, we have to educate people, and we have to have our county commissioners and council persons know that we do not want any area zoned for biomass wood pellet plants. And that's where it starts at. And if we can stop the zoning for them in the United States and stop the subsidies in Europe, the industry will collapse on its own.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And there are a lot of efforts. We are definitely very heavily engaged in the campaign to stop the subsidizing of biomass in Europe, which is what's driving the market for wood pellets across the South, and to change the policies in Europe that treat the burning of biomass as carbon neutral, which we know from science that it is not. And in fact, it's making climate change worse. So there's a lot of work that's going on that we're heavily involved in over in Europe, and there is some progress being made there. The other thing I think that's important to recognize is that, you know, biomass is the thing, or wood pellets is the thing right now. But, you know, we need to be able to stop these types of threats from ongoing assault in these communities. It's wood pellets today. It could be cross-laminated timber tomorrow. It could be bioplastics. There's so much conversation right now about turning trees into plastics as a solution to getting rid of one-time use plastics. So we've got to fundamentally shift the policy dynamic that's at play here and the political dynamic that's at play here in the US if we want to really protect our forests and not just protect them from emerging threats or new threats, but protect them from the entire wood products industry right now, because biomass is the latest threat, but we've also got the world's largest paper producing region in the southeastern US, and paper mills are causing a lot of pollution and a lot of damage. So we need a policy fix here in the US around forests as much as we need to get rid of the subsidies and change the policies around biomass in Europe.
And also, I think it's also very, very important that we continue to educate people in Europe. We continue to enlighten them. They're not being told the whole truth. If you go to the world's largest producers of biomass, which would be Draxon and Viva, if you go to their website, you will see some things taken out of context from the IPCC report. You'll see a lot of justification, but in any of these global settings, I certainly raise the visibility of the issue and the human rights violations that's fueling this process, and just as and challenge people, especially in the UK, because what we're seeing now is no different from the cotton trade that was manned by the slave industry in the US that fueled the Industrial Revolution in the United Kingdom. And what we're looking at now is something very similar. If you had a picture of, if you had a map of the former slave trade states and the wood pellet trade states, they're basically identical, the same states. They're almost the same states. And so we have to call out these human rights atrocities. These are also the states with the highest percentage of African American population. These are also the states who are the most economically depressed. These are also the states who are the most climate vulnerable. And this is very important in our global policy, in our global advocacy, that we have to continue to uplift this and call out countries for human rights atrocities as it relates to adherence to policies, global policies such as the Paris Climate Agreement. So, Reverend Leo, let me ask, what are the best resources for educating teens and students on environmental justice issues?
Well, the best resources are really, you know, we do social media, but what really works and is a little harder now during the pandemic, but it's going in the communities, going to the schools, and talking with people face to face. So we, this year is different, but I guess if we count the Zoom, we probably did more. But every year we do at least a minimum of 6 community forums where we talk with people about what's going on. And then we also meet several times a year with students at South Carolina State University, and also with students at Allen University. And so the best way is to talk to people face to face, but then also there's op-eds and there's blogs and there's a whole lot of different things. But the thing that works best is when we talk to people face to face, neighbors, congregants, co-workers, etc.
Thank you. And let me say a couple of things. As a former elementary education teacher who realized that this was before we had public kindergarten, that we needed to start the education process very, very early on in children's lives. And I ended up actually creating and founding my own preschool and kindergarten. That's really the age where we should start this education process. It's never too early. And that is an area where the fossil fuel industry has already recognized. They start out in elementary school, in preschool, in kindergarten. If you look up their Petro Pete series, they're already pumping disinformation. They're piping this into our school, and it's really alarming. And I think that we're going to have to do the same thing with our messages. We're going to have to get that message out. We're going to have to get it to our young people early. We're going to have to get it to our communities. And a lot of our communities, we will have to meet communities where they are, at the level of understanding where they are. And I think this is going to be very important. And one of the other things that ECHO does, and again, I'm not sure, like Reverend Leo said, what we're going to do this year, but we sponsor field trips. And last October, this time last year, as a matter of fact, almost on the same date, we sponsored a field trip with 2 busloads of students to wetlands area to explain to them the importance of wetlands. Probably one of the most rewarding things you can do for students is that hands-on learning experience, and to hear them say that they learned more from that field trip than they had learned in their classroom the previous year. And it was, you know, such an educational adventure. So I do think that we do have to invest some time and some resources into educating our young people. Okay, we have a couple of questions here that I'm going to go and look into our question and answer, and I'll remind everyone to please go ahead. If you have questions, go ahead and you know, put them in the chat. This one we basically touched on just a bit already. I'm going to try and see if I can find it and go back to it. Let me read one here from Ann Henry. What concrete steps could dismantle the exploitative pellet industry in the U.S. Southeast? I'm sorry, I could barely see that. Any one of our panelists want to take a stab at that?
I think we covered a couple of them. One is, you know, getting rid of the subsidies over in Europe. The other is really getting the resources down on the ground in these communities, getting a massive movement of people here in the U.S. and across the country and in the U.S. South to stand with rural communities who are fighting the expansion of this industry right now at a local level. Leo, you may have some.
Oh, I think you covered it, and as you said, we covered some of these points earlier. And like I said, the important piece is educating communities so that, you know, we stop these plants on the local level. When we educate communities, people become empowered. I would love to see our movement around forests be pretty much like when they talk about offshore oil drilling. As soon as they mention it, you know, there's just an immediate outcry and people don't want to permit it. It starts locally. If we can stop it locally here in the United States from, you know, counties, zoning areas where these pellets can be sited, that would put an end to it here.
And there's a few, I think, opportunities right now at the state level. So in North Carolina, there's been a really robust campaign on this because North Carolina has been ground zero for the expansion of the wood pellet industry. We have a governor who signed an executive order on climate change, assuming he gets in office after November, which it's looking good that he will. There's some real opportunity there in the Clean Power Plan that he signed last year. Pretty much designated that wood pellets had no place in North Carolina's clean energy future, and has developed a climate resiliency plan, which includes some efforts to protect forests. His current efforts fall way short of addressing the impacts that we're now seeing from the permitting of the wood pellet mills that have gone through, even in spite of the governor's, you know, statements about wood pellets and the need to protect forests. So there's still a lot of work to be done there. But that in North Carolina, I think there's a huge opportunity to take advantage of the political situation and to actually drive some positive policy change. And then in Georgia, there's been a resolution that was a bipartisan support that was introduced into the House and the Senate this year in the State House of Georgia. That resolution calls for, you know, opposes biomass and calls for greater forest protection. And there's building support for that resolution to move through the state of Georgia. And then on a federal level, you know, as we were talking about earlier, there's an opportunity to really make sure that as folks at a national level are developing policies around forests and economic recovery as it relates to the climate change, that these issues that we're raising on this call are factored into the policy proposals that are being put forward. So there is an opportunity for things like through the Green New Deal or Biden's climate plan for us to, you know, influence the way that the forest pieces of those policies are getting written.
Okay, another question from the chat here. They keep changing here. Here's one. In West Virginia, where I live and teach, most of the land is privately owned and forested. Throughout a lot of the state, jobs are very sparse. So selling wood might be one of the only money-making opportunities. In this case, and is this the case in South Carolina and beyond as well, where loblolly pine plantation are being intensively harvested? Is that loblolly pine?
Loblolly, yep.
Loblolly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So what we have right now, I think that question is from Brooke. Brooke, what we have right now is a situation where most of our tax structures, our policy structures are really encouraging industrial extraction and commercial logging on private lands. We see in North Carolina, for example, where landowners get tax breaks if they can show that their number one objective is commercial logging. We see large amounts of subsidies that are going to cost share landowners to replant their forests and pine trees. So just those simple things could be tweaked in a way that would allow us to cost share landowners to actually leave more trees in the ground along the rivers and to provide better tax incentives for landowners to actually leave more trees standing. We also need to have a corresponding investment in these rural communities and economic development that is tied to a forest economy that is more consistent with leaving forest standing. And the one that we have continuously talked about on this call, though there are others, is outdoor recreation. You know, a lot of these folks in these communities do not have access to public lands. Through acquiring and purchasing a new generation of publicly owned lands and community-owned forests, where the community actually has a say in how those forests are being managed, we can help to build a more resilient climate landscape while simultaneously building a more diverse and resilient economy that works for more people.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us, for hanging in here. And I think we're going to go ahead and since we are about at our time, go ahead and pass this out to Adam for our next steps and action points.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you to Danna and Leo and Bill and all of you who joined the presentation. I appreciate your questions. I know that Sam and I, who's also in the call, did our best to answer as many as we could. We were typing furiously the whole time, so there will certainly be other points to engage in this. I'm constantly very moved by these presentations, and in full alignment with what Leo was saying around forests and climate and justice being a perfect storm. And one of the things that really jumps out to me in this is the way that a natural forest interacts with itself and is an entire ecosystem. It is not just a collection of trees. It is an entire ecosystem of plants and animals working together. And I believe that is reflective of what we need to be as a movement if we are going to address these issues of environmental justice, of climate justice, and of climate change. And so that is how we win, is working together. And so with that, I want to read a quick quote, and then I'm going to give some action points. This quote's from Clarissa Lewis, and it says, "In nature, everything works in collaboration. There are hummingbirds and flowers that are in such deep coordination, they need each other for survival. How vibrant and alive and successful could our movement be if we moved with such coordination and collaboration?" So with that, I want to give a couple action points moving forward. First, everyone, a couple questions had been asked, and folks are going to be able to, tomorrow, I believe you will get an email outlining you'll receive the recording of the webinar. You can feel free to watch that again or share that with people you think would be interested. Additionally, we are doing this webinar series because Dogwood Alliance has developed a series of briefs and reports that bust some of the biggest myths put out there by the industrial logging industry. If folks go to standforforest.org, you'll be able to go to the tools and resources section, and there you will find a whole host of resources that actually answer many of the questions that are being put in the chat box. So next point, so yes, educate yourself, go and download that Stand for Forest report series. There's also ways that you can build this movement. You need to take the pledge and sign the Stand for Forest pledge. That's a great way to take immediate action. But really you can do that. We want you to incorporate what you learned here today and what you can learn online through this into your own advocacy. In the way that a forest works together as an ecosystem, we need to continually integrate and build up the ways in which we advocate for all of these issues. And we hope today that you learned something around forests and forest protection here in the United States that you can incorporate into your environmental justice and climate advocacy. And finally, we really want to deepen the connections. And so here is my email. Feel free to reach out. Again, just as we want you to incorporate forests into your advocacy, we want to learn about the issues that you're working on and move in solidarity so that when we win, we all win, not just some of us. And so please feel free to reach out. Information as well about the panelists and how you can follow them on social media, get involved with their organizations, will be sent out in the follow-up email on Friday. So again, thank you all for coming. I just really appreciate everyone for attending. Thank you again to our panelists. And we look forward to seeing you soon and working with you on this movement. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye now.